December 15th, 1990. Outside Mann's Chinese Theater, Harrison Ford had signed exactly 0 autographs in 3 years. Marcus Kellerman knew this. He also knew Ford would refuse him. That's exactly why he brought the camera. 300 tourists watched Kellerman approach Ford after the premiere. Ford politely declined. Then Kellerman started talking about carpentry. About 1973, about a woman named Sarah who never got justice. Ford went completely still, not angry, not defensive, still. The crowd expected Hollywood rage, security escorts, celebrity meltdown. Instead, Ford looked straight into Kellerman's hidden camera and said 5 words that would haunt both men forever. "I remember everything, Marcus Kellerman." For 30 seconds, nobody moved. Then Ford walked away, leaving Kellerman with footage that would either destroy a career or reveal a truth 17 years in the making. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Daniel's finger hovered over the panic button beneath his register, the one connected directly to Carmel PD. 23 years of careful anonymity, and Marcus Webb had shattered it with a smartphone and a smirk. "You know what I love about social media?" Webb's voice carried across the bookstore, casual as poison. His camera still pointed at Ford, who stood frozen between the biography section and Daniel's counter. No context required, just pure, visceral reaction. The notification pings from Webb's phone came rapid fire, ding, ding, ding. Each sound drove nails deeper into Daniel's chest. He could see the comments, multiplying in his mind. Arrogant Hollywood elite. Ford thinks he's too good for fans. Boycott Indiana Jones. Ford's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. The actor's famous composure held, but Daniel caught the micro-expression, the slight narrowing of his eyes. Ford was calculating, weighing options. He'd been through media storms before, but this felt different, predatory. "Mr. Ford," Webb continued, stepping closer with his phone. "Care to explain to your fans why a simple signature request was too much trouble? You seemed agitated by the interaction." Agitated. The word was surgical in its precision. Webb was already building the narrative, painting Ford as the aggressor in a story that hadn't even finished writing itself. Daniel's bookstore, turning pages, suddenly felt smaller. The carefully arranged displays of local authors, the cozy reading nook with its worn leather chairs, the hand-painted sign promising stories worth discovering. All of it seemed to contract around the 3 men like a closing fist. A young woman near the poetry section lifted her own phone. Then an elderly man by the travel guides. Within seconds, multiple cameras captured every angle. Daniel recognized the shift. He'd orchestrated it himself in his publicist days. One incident becoming content becoming viral wildfire. "I don't owe explanations for personal boundaries," Ford said quietly, but his voice carried. Professional, controlled, exactly what his old publicist would have coached him to say. His old publicist. Daniel pressed his palms against the counter's cool surface, fighting the urge to step forward, to speak, to shatter the careful life he'd built selling books to tourists and locals who knew him only as the quiet man who recommended perfect novels and made exceptional coffee. Webb's smile widened. Personal boundaries? At a public bookstore? Interesting perspective. His fingers swiped across his screen. "Looks like we're already trending. Hashtag Harrison Ford meltdown is picking up steam." The lie was breathtaking in its audacity. Ford hadn't melted down. He'd simply said no. But Webb understood something Daniel had learned the hard way. Truth was irrelevant once the narrative machine started grinding. More customers were noticing now. A teenager whispered excitedly to her friend. A man in a Monterey Bay Aquarium sweatshirt crept closer, phone ready. Daniel's sanctuary was transforming into a circus, and he was the only one who knew the real performance hadn't even begun. Because this wasn't about Ford. This was about Daniel. Webb's eyes flicked toward the counter, toward him, and the recognition was mutual, instant, devastating. "You know," Webb said, his voice taking on a different quality, "I was just thinking about old times, the stories that got buried, the people who made sure they stayed buried." His gaze locked on Daniel's. "Amazing who you run into in small towns." Ford followed Webb's stare and saw Daniel for the first time since walking into the store. Something shifted in the actor's expression. Confusion, then a flicker of recognition. Not quite placing the face, but sensing familiarity in the way survivors recognize old battlefields. Daniel's throat constricted. The careful distance he'd maintained, the anonymity he'd cultivated, the peace he'd found among books and ocean breezes, Webb was about to incinerate all of it, and Ford would be collateral damage. Again, the customers sensed the electricity in the air. Conversations died. The only sounds were the soft jazz playing through Daniel's speakers and the relentless pinging of social media notifications. Webb raised his phone higher, adjusting the angle to capture both Ford and Daniel in the frame. "I think there's more to this story, don't you? Sometimes the most interesting characters are the ones hiding behind the scenes." Daniel's vision tunneled. The bookstore, his customers, even Ford, everything faded except Webb's predatory smile and the black eye of his camera lens. 23 years ago, Daniel had made a choice that saved Harrison Ford's career and destroyed Marcus Webb's. He'd buried a story that would have ended everything for one of Hollywood's most beloved stars. The fallout had cost Daniel his career, his relationships, his entire life in Los Angeles. Now Webb had found him, and this time Daniel had nowhere to run. The red recording light blinked steadily, waiting for his decision. 30 seconds of silence stretched into eternity while the internet watched, judged, and demanded entertainment. Daniel stepped out from behind the counter. Daniel's footsteps on the hardwood floor sounded like gunshots in the sudden quiet. Each step carried him further from the safety of his counter, from the careful boundaries he'd maintained for 15 years. The familiar weight of his father's St. Christopher pendant, worn smooth by decades of anxious rubbing, pressed against his chest beneath his flannel shirt. "Gentlemen." His voice came out steadier than he'd expected, though his hands trembled slightly. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately." Webb's predatory grin widened. "Oh, I don't think privacy serves anyone's interests here, do you, Daniel?" The use of his first name was a scalpel between ribs. Ford's head turned sharply, studying Daniel with new intensity. The actor's famous ability to read people, honed by decades of working with directors who communicated in subtext, was fully engaged now. Daniel felt the weight of every eye in the store. Mrs. Chen, who came in every Tuesday for the latest cozy mysteries and always asked about his weekend plans with genuine warmth. Jake, the college kid who worked part-time shelving books and had been saving for months to buy his girlfriend a first-edition Steinbeck. The young mother who brought her daughter for Saturday story time, both of them lighting up when Daniel did his voices for different characters. These people knew him as the man who remembered their reading preferences, who ordered special titles without being asked, who kept a bowl of sea glass by the register because children loved searching for the perfect piece. They knew him as someone who belonged here, among the salt air and cypress trees, far from the glittering violence of Hollywood. Webb was about to take that away. "You know," Daniel said, moving slowly toward the biography section where Ford still stood, "I've always believed bookstores should be sanctuaries, places where people can explore ideas without judgment, without cameras." How poetic. Webb's phone tracked Daniel's movement. "But surely you understand the public's right to know? Transparency? You must have some thoughts on that, given your background." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Daniel could feel Ford's growing awareness, pieces clicking into place behind those intelligent eyes. In the actor's peripheral vision, Daniel caught a gesture he remembered from their shared past. Ford's thumb rubbing against his index finger, a nervous tell that had once helped Daniel anticipate tough interview questions. The afternoon light filtering through the store's front windows cast everything in golden amber, making the scene feel frozen in time. Daniel breathed in the familiar scent of paper and binding glue, the lavender sachets his assistant Sarah tucked between shelves, the lingering aroma of the morning's coffee. In a few minutes, this might all be gone. "Sarah." He spoke quietly to the young woman behind the poetry section, who'd been watching with growing concern. Sarah Martinez, 26, master's degree in literature, dreams of opening a writing retreat in Big Sur. She'd become like the daughter Daniel never had, and he'd been helping her save money for her dream by giving her extra hours and a key to the store. "Yes, Mr. Garrett?" Her voice was uncertain. Could you please escort our other customers to the cafe next door? Tell Miguel I'll cover their coffee and pastries. Store policy during difficult situations. Sarah hesitated, clearly wanting to protect him, but Daniel's gentle nod convinced her to begin quietly approaching customers. Most were reluctant to leave the unfolding drama, but Sarah's sweet insistence and the promise of free coffee gradually cleared the space, all except the teenager with her phone still recording. That won't work, Webb said pleasantly. The story's already out there. But I appreciate the attempt at damage control. Very professional, almost like you've done this before. Ford stepped closer to Daniel, and for a moment they stood side by side, facing Webb. The actor's presence was solid, reassuring in the way Daniel remembered from their past. Ford had always been steady under pressure, capable of surprising kindness when the camera stopped rolling. I don't know what history you two have, Ford said quietly, but this isn't the way to resolve it. Webb laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Oh, but Mr. Ford, you're at the center of our history. You just don't remember. But don't worry, I've kept excellent records, photos, documents, audio files that certain people thought were destroyed. Daniel's blood chilled. He'd been thorough 23 years ago, or thought he had been. But Webb was a journalist, and journalists were pack rats by nature. The pendant at Daniel's throat seemed to grow heavier. His father had worn it through World War II, through 30 years as a Boston beat cop, through the cancer that finally claimed him. For protection, he'd told Daniel when passing it down, and for doing what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Daniel looked at Ford, still handsome at 78, still carrying himself with the quiet confidence that had made him America's favorite action hero, and still completely unaware that his life was about to detonate. Again, Daniel's world shifted the moment Webb pulled out the manila envelope. The journalist's movements were deliberate, theatrical. He knew exactly what kind of bomb he was detonating. The envelope was old, yellowed at the edges, with Ford, classified, written in Daniel's own handwriting from 23 years ago. His younger self's careful penmanship looked like evidence from a crime scene. I've been saving this for a special occasion, Webb said, his fingers tracing the envelope's sealed edge. Amazing what turns up in storage units when people don't pay their rent. Apparently your old assistant wasn't as loyal as you thought, Daniel. She kept copies. Melissa. The name hit Daniel like ice water. His former assistant, the one person besides him who'd had access to everything, the one who'd disappeared right after the Webb incident, claiming she needed a fresh start. He'd never questioned it. Guilt had made him generous with severance packages and references. Ford's eyes moved between them, reading the tableau with growing comprehension. Daniel Garrett, he said slowly, the name emerging from decades-old memory. Harrison Ford's publicist. You handled the Paramount years. Among other things, Webb said, sliding his finger under the envelope's flap. Tell me, Mr. Ford, do you remember the summer of 2001? That little incident in Morocco during the firewall location scouting? The one that mysteriously never made it into any newspapers? Daniel watched the color drain from Ford's face. The actor's hand moved instinctively to his left temple, a scar hidden by careful makeup and good lighting, invisible unless you knew where to look. Daniel knew. He'd been there when it happened, when everything went wrong. That's ancient history, Ford said, but his voice had changed, become smaller. Is it? Webb's smile was surgical. Because I have photos of you leaving that hospital in Casablanca. I have the police report that was mysteriously buried. I have witness statements that were never filed. The envelope crackled as he opened it. And I have audio of your publicist bribing officials to make it all disappear. The teenager still recording gasped as she caught fragments of conversation. Her phone's screen showed the live stream viewer count climbing. 847 viewers, 923, 1,205. The numbers scrolled upward like a slot machine paying out destruction. Daniel felt his carefully constructed life collapsing in real time. Ford stepped backward, bumping into the biography shelf, his biography, a bestseller Daniel had featured prominently near the front of the store. The irony was nauseating. You were protecting him, Webb continued, pulling out a photograph. Even upside down, Daniel could see what it showed, Ford unconscious in a Moroccan hospital bed, bandages covering half his face, a young Moroccan woman holding his hand, from the scandal of what really happened that night. Who she was, what she meant to him. Stop. The word came out as a whisper, but it cut through the air like a blade. Webb looked up, feigning surprise. "Oh, Daniel, surely you're not still playing guardian angel, after what protecting him cost you." Ford was staring at the photograph now, and Daniel could see the recognition dawning, not just of the incident, but of how completely Daniel had shielded him from the consequences. The bribes, the destroyed evidence, the careers Daniel had ended to keep the story buried, including his own, when he'd refused to let Webb publish what he'd uncovered. "She was 19, Webb said conversationally, as if discussing the weather, a local girl. And when her family found out about her relationship with the famous American actor, he pulled out another photograph. Well, honor killings make for such tragic headlines, don't they?" Ford made a sound like he'd been punched. His famous composure finally cracked, and Daniel saw something he'd never witnessed in all their years working together, Harrison Ford, completely broken. The pendant burned against Daniel's chest. His father's voice echoed across the decades. "Do what's right, son. Even when it costs you everything." "She's alive," Daniel said quietly, the words falling into the bookstore's terrible silence. "Amara Benali. She's alive." Webb's head snapped up, his predatory confidence flickering for the first time. "What? You never followed up, did you?" Daniel's voice grew stronger. "Too busy destroying my career to finish your research. She's alive. Lives in Montreal now. Married name is Dubois. Has 3 children and runs a translation service." The photograph in Webb's hand suddenly looked different. Evidence of a tragedy that never happened. A story built on assumptions and incomplete information. Daniel had spent years making sure Amara stayed safe, stayed hidden, stayed alive. It was the one secret he'd never told anyone, not even Ford. 23 years ago, you tried to destroy 2 people based on a half-truth," Daniel said, stepping forward. The teenager's phone captured every word. "Today, you're about to do it again." Ford was looking at him now with something beyond gratitude, with the terrible understanding that Daniel had carried this burden alone for more than 2 decades. Webb's envelope suddenly seemed less like a weapon and more like what it really was, old paper filled with old pain, wielded by a man who'd never learned the difference between truth and destruction. The notification pings continued, but they sounded different now, less like funeral bells, more like the chaos before something new could be born. The silence that followed Daniel's revelation felt alive, dangerous. Webb stood frozen with the photograph halfway to his chest, his carefully orchestrated performance derailed by a single truth he'd never bothered to verify. The teenager's phone trembled in her grip, live-stream viewers exploding past 2,000 as the story spiraled beyond anyone's control. Daniel could feel Ford's stare burning into the side of his face, but he couldn't meet those eyes. Not yet. 23 years of carefully maintained distance, of letting Ford believe the simplified version, that his publicist had simply made some bad publicity disappear. Ford had never known about Amara's family hunting her across 3 countries, had never known about Daniel's network of contacts helping her disappear into a new identity, had never known the real cost of his protection. "You're lying," Webb said, but uncertainty crept into his voice like cracks in ice. "Her children are named Sophie, Marcus, and Elena," Daniel continued, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "She teaches Berber languages to immigrant communities. Her husband runs a small construction company in Verdun. She's been safe for 20 years because some of us actually finished what we started." Webb's face cycled through confusion, rage, and something that might have been fear. The journalist had built his comeback on this story. Daniel could see it in the way he'd rehearsed every gesture, every revelation. Without Amara's death, without the tragedy that made Ford complicit in something unforgivable, Webb had nothing but old photographs and recycled scandal. The bell above the front door chimed, and Sarah returned, her face flushed with anxiety. She moved quickly to Daniel's side, close enough that he could smell her vanilla perfume, the same scent that usually comforted him during long inventory days. Now it felt like a goodbye. "Mr. Garrett, there are cars pulling up outside, news vans. Someone from TMZ is setting up a camera across the street." Of course. The live stream had done its work. Daniel's sanctuary was about to become a circus, and everyone he tried to protect would be dragged into the spotlight. His neighbors, his employees, his carefully rebuilt life, all of it collateral damage in Webb's war. Ford finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Daniel, all these years, I never knew she was alive. I thought... He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. I know what you thought, Daniel said quietly. I let you think it. It was easier than explaining why she had to disappear completely, why she could never contact you, why even knowing she was alive would put her in danger. The words hung between them, heavy with decades of guilt and misunderstanding. Daniel remembered the night in his Beverly Hills office when he told Ford that Amara was gone, letting the actor's imagination fill in the terrible details. It had been kinder than the truth, that her family's reach extended far beyond Morocco, that any connection to her past life could still get her killed. Webb recovered his composure with visible effort. Touching reunion aside, this doesn't change what happened. Ford still had a relationship with a teenage girl. Still used his wealth and influence to... To what? Daniel's voice cut like steel. Fall in love with someone 3 years younger than him? Have a consensual relationship that her fundamentalist family tried to turn into an honor killing? Or are you talking about how he spent the last 20 years anonymously funding women's shelters in her name, never knowing she was alive to see the good that came from his guilt? Ford's sharp intake of breath told Daniel he'd revealed too much, but it was too late to stop now. The teenage recorder caught every word. The livestream viewers, now over 3,000, hung on each revelation. Sarah's hand found Daniel's arm, a small anchor in the chaos. "Should I call the police?" she whispered. Before Daniel could answer, his phone buzzed. Then again. Text messages flooding in from customers, neighbors, friends who'd seen the videos already spreading across social media. "Is that really you? Are you okay? The news trucks are blocking my driveway." His quiet life was over. Webb had won that much, at least. But as Daniel watched the journalist fumble with his envelope of obsolete evidence, he realized something had shifted. The story Webb had come to tell, the one about a powerful man escaping justice, had become something else entirely. Something messier, more human, less suitable for viral consumption. The truth, as Daniel had learned long ago, was rarely as satisfying as the lie. Webb's eyes darted toward the front windows, where camera crews were indeed setting up. His moment was slipping away, and they both knew it. Desperation made him dangerous. "This isn't over," Webb said, his voice dropping to something only Daniel and Ford could hear. "I have other sources, other stories. You can't protect everyone forever, Daniel." The threat was clear. This wasn't just about Ford, or even about Amara. This was about Webb's need to destroy the man who had once made him look like a fool. Daniel felt his father's pendant warm against his chest, and made his choice. "No," he said quietly, "but I can start by protecting the truth." The words hung in the air between them, and Daniel felt the weight of 23 years pressing down like stones. Webb's face twisted with something beyond rage, the look of a man watching his life's work crumble in real time. The truth? Webb's laugh was hollow, desperate. "You want to talk about truth? Let's talk about Elena Vasquez." The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. He felt Ford stiffen beside him, saw Sarah's confusion, watched the teenager's phone capture the moment his carefully constructed world began its final collapse. Elena, sweet, ambitious Elena, who'd worked as a script supervisor on 3 Ford productions, who'd trusted the wrong people, who'd died in a car accident that wasn't an accident. "I see you remember her," Webb continued, his confidence returning as Daniel's face went ashen. "Little harder to explain that one away, isn't it? Can't save them all, can you, Daniel?" Ford's voice came out strangled. "Elena's dead?" 7 years ago, Webb said, pulling another photograph from his envelope. "Funny thing about car accidents, they're so much easier to arrange than people think. Especially when certain powerful men decide a young woman knows too much about their recreational habits." Daniel's knees nearly buckled. Elena had called him 3 weeks before she died, voice shaking, talking about evidence she'd found. Documents, photos, things that could destroy careers, lives, entire studios. Daniel had told her to stay quiet, to let him handle it, to trust the system that had always protected the stars from their worst impulses. He'd handled it all right. Made the evidence disappear, made Elena's concerns disappear, made Elena herself disappear into a job on location in Romania far from Hollywood's reach. He'd thought she was safe there. She was going to expose the whole network, Webb said softly. All of them. The parties, the girls, the cover-ups. But someone got to her first. His eyes found Ford, then returned to Daniel. Someone who knew exactly where she was hiding. The accusation hung unspoken but clear. Daniel felt Sarah's hand tighten on his arm, felt the teenager's camera zoom in on his face, felt 3,000 viewers watching his world end in real time. The livestream comments were scrolling too fast to read, but he caught fragments: cover up and murder and Harrison Ford. "You think Daniel started, but Webb cut him off. "I think you've spent your entire career making inconvenient people disappear. Sometimes they got new identities and happy lives in Montreal. Sometimes they got brake lines that failed on mountain roads in Romania." Webb stepped closer, close enough that Daniel could smell the journalist's stale coffee breath, see the broken capillaries in his eyes. "The question is, which kind of protection is Mr. Ford getting today?" Ford moved away from both of them, his face gray, understanding dawning like a terrible sunrise. "Elena was trying to expose someone, and you knew about it?" Daniel wanted to explain, wanted to tell Ford about the network Elena had uncovered. Producers and directors and, yes, actors who'd turned young women into party favors and then discarded them like used tissues. Wanted to explain how he'd tried to get her FBI protection, how his contacts had refused to help, how he'd thought distance was the only safety he could offer. Instead, he heard himself saying, "I tried to save her, like you saved Amara?" Ford's voice was bitter now. "By making her disappear? By letting people think she was dead?" "By keeping them alive," Daniel said, but even he could hear how weak it sounded. Webb smiled, sensing victory. "Tell me, Daniel, how many others are there? How many inconvenient women have you saved over the years? And how many of them actually survived your protection?" The teenager's phone caught Daniel's silence, broadcast it to thousands. His carefully built reputation, as protector, as sanctuary keeper, as the man who chose truth over destruction, crumbled with each passing second. Outside, car doors slammed as more reporters arrived. Soon the entire street would be circus chaos, and everyone he'd tried to shield would be caught in the crossfire. Sarah was looking at him differently now, not with the admiration he'd grown accustomed to, but with dawning horror. "Mr. Garrett? Is he telling the truth?" Daniel opened his mouth to deny it, to explain, to somehow justify 23 years of choices made in shadow. But the words wouldn't come, because Webb was right about one thing: Daniel had made people disappear, had used his connections, his influence, his knowledge of how the system worked to erase inconvenient truths. The fact that he'd meant to save them didn't change what he'd become. Ford stepped toward the door, toward the waiting chaos outside. "I need to leave. Now." "No," Webb said sharply. "We're not finished." But Ford was already moving, and Daniel realized with crystalline clarity that the actor wasn't running from Webb's accusations. He was running from Daniel himself. "Wait." The word tore from Daniel's throat as Ford reached for the door handle. "Harrison, wait." Ford's hand froze on the brass handle, but he didn't turn around. His shoulders were rigid, braced against whatever revelation would come next. "Elena called me the night she died," Daniel said, the words falling like stones into still water. 3 m, Romania time. "She was terrified, said someone had been following her, said her hotel room had been searched. She begged me to come get her." Webb's triumphant expression flickered. This wasn't part of his script. Daniel pulled out his phone with trembling fingers, scrolled back through years of saved voicemails until he found the one he'd never been able to delete. Elena's voice filled the bookstore, young and desperate and heartbreakingly alive. "Daniel, oh God, I'm so sorry to call this late, but I don't know who else. They found me. I don't know how, but they found me. The same black car has been outside the hotel for 3 days, and when I came back from dinner tonight, someone had gone through my things. The photos I hid, they're gone. All of them except—" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Except the ones of Harrison." Ford spun around, his face white. "What photos of me?" But Elena's voice continued from beyond the grave. Daniel, I kept them separate because I wasn't sure. I mean, the others were clearly assault, clearly wrong, but Harrison's, God, I don't know what to think. The girl in the photos with him, she looks so young, but she's smiling. They're both smiling. It looks like they were in love. The bookstore fell silent except for the distant sound of news crews setting up outside. Daniel watched understanding dawn on Ford's face, the terrible realization that Elena had died protecting him from photos that would have destroyed his marriage, his career, his life, even though they showed nothing but a consensual relationship with Amara. She died for nothing, Ford whispered. She died protecting me from evidence of something that wasn't even wrong. Webb stepped forward, sensing his story reshaping itself. What happened to the other photos? The real evidence? Daniel met his eyes steadily. I destroyed them, all of them. Every piece of evidence Elena had gathered about the real predators. He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. Including the ones of you, Marcus. The silence that followed was absolute. Webb's face cycled through confusion, denial, and dawning horror. The teenager's phone captured every micro-expression as the journalist realized his carefully constructed narrative had just imploded. That's impossible, Webb said, but his voice cracked. I was investigating the story. I was trying to expose. You were one of the participants, Daniel said quietly. Elena had photos of you at 3 different parties between 1998 and 2000. You with girls who couldn't have been older than 16. You, Marcus, passing around cocaine and drunk teenagers like party favors. Sarah gasped. The live stream exploded with comments as viewers began to understand what they were witnessing. That's why you really went after Harrison, isn't it? Daniel continued. Not because you cared about justice, because you needed him to be the monster so no one would look too closely at the real ones. Including you. Webb's envelope slipped from nerveless fingers, photographs scattering across the hardwood floor. Images of Ford and Amara mixed with hospital records, police reports, evidence of a love story that Webb had spent 2 decades trying to twist into something ugly. You killed her, Ford said, and his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Elena found evidence of your crimes, so you had her murdered. No. Webb backed toward the window, shaking his head frantically. No, I didn't order. But Daniel was already pulling up another file on his phone. Elena sent me insurance, Marcus. Everything she had, uploaded to a secure server the day before she died, including audio recordings from those parties. Your voice, very clearly identifiable, discussing which girls were fresh meat and which ones knew how to keep their mouths shut. The teenager filming looked like she might be sick. Her viewer count had exploded past 5,000, but she seemed to have forgotten the phone entirely. Webb's face crumpled. 23 years of righteous fury, of positioning himself as the truth-teller exposing Hollywood's corruption, and he'd been running from his own reflection the entire time. The network you helped Elena uncover, Daniel said softly. You weren't investigating it. You were protecting it. And when she got too close to the truth about all of you, someone made a phone call to Romania. Ford stepped toward Webb, and for a moment Daniel thought the actor might strike him. Instead, Ford's voice came out deadly quiet. How many others? How many young women died because you couldn't face what you'd become? Webb's answer was barely a whisper. I was trying to protect myself. And there it was, the truth that reframed everything. Webb's pursuit of Ford, his destruction of Daniel's career, his decades-long obsession with this story, all of it had been one desperate man's attempt to create a bigger monster than himself. The confession hung in the air like smoke, acrid and choking. Daniel watched Webb's shoulders slump, 23 years of carefully constructed righteousness collapsing in on itself. The journalist's breathing had gone shallow, rapid. The hyperventilation of a man whose entire identity had just been stripped away on live video. I need to sit down, Webb whispered, reaching blindly for one of the reading chairs. His face had gone the color of old newspaper, gray, brittle, ready to crumble at the slightest touch. Sarah moved instinctively to help him, her bookstore training kicking in despite everything. She guided Webb to the leather armchair by the window, the one where Mrs. Henderson read to children every Thursday afternoon. The irony wasn't lost on Daniel, a predator seeking comfort in a chair meant for innocents. Ford hadn't moved from his position by the door, but Daniel could see the actor's hands shaking, not with fear now, but with a rage that had nowhere to go. Elena's death, Amara's exile, his own 23 years of guilt, all of it orchestrated by a man who'd been running from his own crimes. The network, Ford said, his voice barely controlled. How big was it? Daniel's phone buzzed incessantly. Messages, calls, notifications from every platform as the live stream exploded across the internet. But he ignored it all, focusing on the weight of Elena's evidence in his digital files. Evidence he'd carried like a millstone for 7 years, never knowing if releasing it would save lives or destroy them. 17 men, he said quietly. Producers, directors, 2 studio executives. They called themselves the Carousel. Young women went around and around, never getting off until they were used up. The teenager with the phone was crying now, great silent tears that dripped onto her screen. 5,000 viewers had become 8,000, then 12. The story was mutating in real time, spreading through social media like wildfire, but Daniel realized he no longer cared about controlling the narrative. Some secrets were too heavy to carry alone. I have documentation on all of them, he continued. Elena was meticulous. She spent 3 years gathering evidence before she tried to expose it. Audio recordings, photographs, financial records showing payments to silence victims. His eyes found Webb's terrified face. Medical records from emergency room visits. Police reports that were buried. Autopsy reports from women who overdosed or had accidents after threatening to talk. Sarah's sharp intake of breath cut through the room. She was staring at Daniel as if seeing him for the first time. Not the quiet bookstore owner who recommended poetry and made perfect cappuccinos, but the man who'd held evidence of industrial-scale abuse and chosen to bury it rather than risk the chaos of exposure. Why didn't you release it? Ford asked. All these years, why didn't you? Because Elena was dead, Daniel said simply. Because Amara had to disappear. Because every time someone tried to expose them, they ended up in a morgue or a psychiatric ward, or simply vanishing without a trace. He pulled off his glasses, rubbed his burning eyes. I wasn't brave enough to be next. Webb was sobbing now, quiet, broken sounds that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. The man who'd walked into the bookstore an hour ago, confident, aggressive, ready to destroy lives for clicks and views, had been replaced by this hollow shell. I never touched anyone, Webb whispered. I swear to God, I was just there. I was young, I wanted to belong, to be part of their world. I thought if I could get close enough, I could expose them from the inside. But you didn't, Ford said flatly. You participated. You watched. You stayed silent while they hurt children. I was going to. I had plans. But then Elena started investigating, and they found out I'd been taking notes, keeping records, and they said if I ever talked, they'd make sure I went down with them. They had photos of me at the parties, made it look like... Webb's voice cracked. They turned me into bait, made me recruit girls, told them I was a journalist who could help their careers, and every time I tried to stop, they reminded me what would happen if I didn't cooperate. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. Webb hadn't just been protecting himself. He'd been actively complicit, trapped in a web of blackmail and fear, luring young women into the very predators he claimed to be investigating. Outside, car doors slammed and voices shouted questions. The carnival was beginning, the feeding frenzy that would consume all of them. But Daniel found himself oddly calm, as if the worst thing had already happened and everything else was just aftermath. His phone rang. Harrison Ford's name on the caller ID, even though the man was standing 6 feet away. Daniel looked up confused and saw Ford holding his own phone with a grim smile. It's time, Ford said. We call the FBI. We release everything, all of it. Daniel stared at the ringing phone, Elena's evidence burning in his digital files like an ember waiting to become a wildfire. Once he answered, there would be no going back. The phone rang again. Daniel answered the phone. FBI Agent Sarah Chen. Is this Daniel Garrett? The irony of another Sarah asking him to make the most important choice of his life wasn't lost on him. Yes, we're outside your location, sir. Based on what we've observed through the live stream, we need to speak with you immediately about evidence in your possession. Through the window, Daniel could see black SUVs flanking the news vans. Not a coincidence. They'd been monitoring, waiting, probably for years. Elena's evidence had always been too dangerous to ignore completely. "Mr. Garrett." Agent Chen's voice was calm but urgent. "We understand you have materials related to organized criminal activity in Hollywood. We're prepared to offer full federal protection in exchange for your cooperation." Daniel looked around the bookstore, his sanctuary, his refuge from the very world now demanding his return. The teenager was still filming, her viewer count climbing past 20,000. Sarah stood frozen by the poetry section, her face a map of betrayal and dawning understanding. Webb had stopped sobbing and was watching Daniel with desperate hope, as if cooperation might somehow absolve his own sins. And Ford was nodding slowly, his eyes holding something Daniel hadn't seen there before. Not fear, not guilt, but a kind of weary relief. The relief of a man finally ready to stop running from the truth. "The evidence will destroy innocent people alongside the guilty," Daniel said into the phone. "Careers, families, lives of people who were just in the wrong photo at the wrong time. And keeping it hidden has allowed how many predators to continue operating?" Agent Chen's response was sharp, professional. "How many more Elena Sandovals have died while you protected the innocent bystanders?" The words hit like physical blows. Daniel closed his eyes, seeing Elena's face from 7 years ago. Bright, determined, convinced she could save the world if someone would just listen. She'd trusted him to make the right choice. Instead, he'd made the safe one. "Agent Chen," he said quietly, "if I cooperate, what happens to the people who were coerced? The ones who were blackmailed into participating?" A long pause. "That depends on the evidence and their willingness to testify against the primary perpetrators." Daniel's eyes found Webb, who was listening to every word. The broken journalist nodded slowly, understanding passing between them like a current. Webb's crimes couldn't be undone, but his testimony could stop others from following the same path. "I'll need guarantees," Daniel said. "Protection for my employees, immunity for witnesses willing to cooperate, and a promise that this investigation won't become a media circus designed to destroy everyone it touches. Sir, we can't control the media response." "No," Daniel said, looking at the teenager whose phone had probably just triggered the largest Hollywood scandal since Watergate. "But you can control how the evidence is released, strategically. With consideration for the victims who survived." Ford stepped forward, holding out his hand for the phone. Daniel hesitated, then handed it over. "Agent Chen, this is Harrison Ford. I'm willing to make a full statement about everything I witnessed and heard during my relationship with Amara Santos. I'm also prepared to testify publicly about the intimidation and cover-up efforts that followed." The teenager's phone nearly slipped from her nerveless fingers. Harrison Ford offering to testify publicly would be the story of the decade. "Additionally," Ford continued, "I'm establishing a foundation for victims of industry abuse, with Mr. Garrett's evidence as the starting point for identifying those who need support." His eyes met Daniel's. "Some secrets destroy people. Others protect them. It's time we learned the difference." Agent Chen's voice carried new respect. "We'll have a team there in 5 minutes. Please secure all digital materials and prepare for immediate transport to a safe location." Ford ended the call and handed the phone back to Daniel. "Elena would have wanted this. Elena would have wanted justice 7 years ago," Daniel replied, "before more people died. Maybe. But she also would have understood why you were afraid." Ford glanced toward Webb, who was sitting with his head in his hands. "Fear doesn't always make us monsters, Daniel. Sometimes it just makes us human." The bookstore door chimed as federal agents entered, their presence immediately transforming the cozy space into a crime scene. Sarah grabbed Daniel's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Will you be coming back?" she asked. Daniel looked around at his carefully built sanctuary, the books that had sheltered him, the quiet life that had seemed like salvation but might have been just another form of prison. Outside, camera flashes exploded like lightning, illuminating the circus his choices had created. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but for the first time in 23 years, I'm not running away from something. I'm running toward it. The truth. Messy, destructive, liberating truth." Agent Chen approached with evidence bags and a voice recorder. "Mr. Garrett, we're ready when you are." Daniel nodded, pulled out his phone, and began uploading Elena's files to the FBI server. The reckoning had finally begun. 3 months later, Daniel sat in the same leather chair where Marcus Webb had confessed, watching the morning fog roll in from Monterey Bay. The bookstore looked exactly as it had before the circus arrived. Same weathered spines on the shelves, same coffee-stained counter, same view of the courtyard where tourists fed impossibly brave squirrels. But everything had changed, including him. The federal investigation had moved with surgical precision. 17 arrests across 3 states, 43 victims identified and contacted, a network dismantled piece by piece like a bomb being diffused. Webb's cooperation had been essential, his testimony providing the roadmap through 25 years of careful corruption. He was serving 8 years in minimum security, writing a book about complicity and redemption that would probably never find a publisher. Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Ford. Amara's documentary premieres tonight. She wanted you to know. Amara Santos had emerged from her self-imposed exile 3 weeks after the story broke. No longer the frightened girl who'd fled to Ecuador, but a woman with something to say. Her documentary, The Carousel, used Elena's evidence and her own story to expose how young performers were systematically groomed and exploited. It would win awards, change policies, save lives. The girl Ford had loved had become the woman Elena had dreamed of being. Daniel? Sarah's voice drifted from behind the counter. She'd stayed through everything. The media siege, the FBI interviews, the gradual return to something resembling normalcy. Mrs. Henderson is here for story time. He looked up to see the elderly librarian arranging picture books on the children's table, her movements as precise and comforting as ritual. In an hour, the reading corner would fill with small voices and smaller hands, innocents oblivious to the darkness that had once pooled in these very chairs. The bookstore had been cleansed by their laughter, made sacred again by stories that ended with justice and hope. The door chimed, and Daniel's chest tightened reflexively. 3 months later, he still expected predators and journalists with every new customer. Instead, a young man entered, maybe 25, carrying a worn paperback and an expression Daniel recognized. The look of someone seeking shelter between pages. "Can I help you find something?" Daniel asked. "Actually," the young man said, "I was wondering if you were hiring. I heard you were the kind of place that gave people second chances." Daniel studied his face, the careful hope, the practiced stillness of someone who'd learned not to expect kindness. Another refugee from whatever story had broken him, looking for the same sanctuary Daniel had found here 15 years ago. "What's your experience?" "I worked at a bookstore in San Francisco until recently. Before that," the young man hesitated. "Before that, I was involved in some things I'm not proud of. Nothing illegal, but I hurt people by staying silent when I should have spoken up. I'm trying to figure out how to live with that." The honesty hit Daniel like recognition. How many Marcus Webbs were there in the world? Not monsters, just broken people who'd made terrible choices out of fear or ambition or simple human weakness. How many could be saved if someone offered them a different path before it was too late? "What's your name?" Michael Torres." Daniel extended his hand. "I'm Daniel Garrett, and yes, we're hiring, but I should warn you. Working here means learning to recommend books that tell the truth, even when the truth is difficult. Can you handle that?" Michael's relief was visible, his shoulders dropping as if he'd been holding his breath for months. "I think I'm ready to try." Through the window, Daniel watched a news van pull into the parking lot. Not for him this time, but for the Artichoke Festival organizing meeting at the community center. Normal news in a normal town, the kind of story that wouldn't trend on social media or destroy anyone's life, the kind of story that mattered precisely because it was small. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Ford Foundation approved its first round of grants today. Elena would have liked the scholarship recipients. The Elena Santos Foundation for Truth in Media had become Ford's full-time mission, providing resources for investigative journalists and support for abuse victims. The actor had kept his promise. His testimony had been thorough, unflinching, and public. His marriage had survived, strengthened by finally sharing the burden he'd carried alone for 23 years. Some secrets, Daniel had learned, were too heavy for one person to bear. Sarah appeared at his shoulder, holding 2 cups of coffee and watching Michael explore the poetry section with careful reverence. "Think he'll work out?" she asked. Daniel accepted the coffee, inhaling the familiar comfort of routine restored. Outside, the fog was lifting, revealing patches of blue sky and the distant promise of clarity. The morning light fell across Elena's memorial corner, not a shrine to her death, but a celebration of the truth she'd died protecting. Her photograph smiled beside a small plaque in memory of those who speak truth to power and those who finally learn to listen. The reckoning had ended, but the real work was just beginning.